Hey everyone, this is Pallavi and today I'm going to show the 18th game of the book Chess, The Art of Logical Thinking by Neil MacDonald. This game was played between Korchnoi and Karpov during World Championship in Merano in 1981. The opening plate was Queen's Gambit. The game emphasizes the importance of strong position and play and strategic planning and exploiting pawn structures in chess. So without further ado, let's start. White started with c4. A very logical move which gains control of the d5 square. e6. Black wants to set up a firm barrier of pawns on the light squares in the center. Knight c3. White responds with a sound developing move which increases his influence over the d5 square. d5. As planned, Black now has a fair chunk of the center and already threatens to drive away the white knight with d4. Now white played d4. Play now transposes from the English opening into the Queen's Gambit declined. Both players have chosen to build a wall of pawns in the center behind which they can develop their forces. Now Black played bishop e7. In a classical opening like Queen's Gambit, there are certain guidelines to follow, such as moving your knights before your bishops. However, in this specific situation, when Black plays knight f6, White can use a move like bishop to g5 to put pressure on the knight. Then White can develop their king's knight to e2, making it more flexible than placing it on f3. To counter this, Black delays their knight on f6, making White commit to placing their knight on f3 first. So in the Queen's Gambit decline, it's a good idea for Black to put their bishop on e7 early in the game, and this won't cause any problems. Now White played after bishop e7, knight f3. Despite the observations I mentioned earlier, this is by no means a bad square for the knight as it is engaged in the fight for the center. Black played knight f6, developing towards the center, making way for castle on the king side. Bishop g5. White is focusing on developing his queen side pieces. He's doing this because Black's moves haven't been very aggressive, so he doesn't need to rush to move his king to safety. Instead, he can carefully pick good squares for his pieces. That's why he doesn't hurry to play e3, even though it would let his bishop go to d3. He wants to first move his queen's bishop outside his pawn structure, and only after that he thinks about playing e3. So after bishop g5, Black played h6. Black moves the bishop to prevent it from controlling the two diagonals, and this could help keep the Black king safe from back rank checkmates later in the game. Now White played bishop h4. Naturally, in choosing a retreat square, White keeps up the pressure on the knight on f6, which in essence is an attack on the defender of the key d5 square. Now Black played kingside castle. Black has developed his kingside pieces and castled and established his center, and it has only taken 6 moves. Rook c1. Again, White is happy to delay his kingside development in favor of mobilizing his queenside pieces. By putting the rook on c1, he aims to deter Black from playing b7 to b6 and bishop b7, his natural queenside deployment, in view of the weakness created on c7. Now Black played a good move. D takes c4. Black is willingly giving up some space on the board because he believes it will help him counter any potential threats from the white rook on the c file. Now White played e3. White clears the way to recapture with the bishop on c4. c5. The point of Black's idea, he gets rid of the potentially weak pawn on c7, after which there will be no structural defects in his position. Bishop takes c4, and now Black played c takes d4. If white intends to make an effort to win, they will have to recapture using a pawn. This is because if they capture with the knight or with the queen, the lack of pawns beyond the third rank can lead to a dull game with a high chance of ending in a draw. So white captured with the pawn. We are in a situation with an isolated queen's pawn, also known as IQP in chess books. The question is whether the pawn on d4 is strong or weak. Well, it's a bit of both. From a structural perspective, it's weak because it's all alone and can be attacked by black pieces from the front. Plus, the square in front of it, d5, is a great spot for a black knight. And it can be chased away by white. It can't be chased away by any white pawns. On the flip side, it's still a central pawn, even if it is isolated. It gives white's knight good squares on e5 and sometimes c5. White's pieces have more space to move around behind the pawn, and the pawn can even advance to d5 for a strong central move. If black tries to go to d5 with their knight, it's not easy to attack the d4 pawn with their rooks because the knight will be blocking their way. In the game, Karpov makes the d4 pawn seem like a problem with smart moves. But in reality, there are pros and cons of having an IQP, and it's a balanced situation. So now black played knight c6. Black blocks the c file and attacks the d4 pawn and gets another piece involved in the action. Now white played kingside castle. One good feature for white is that he has all his pieces deployed to decent squares, whereas black still has to find a useful role for his queen's bishop. Now black played knight h5, a good move. Karpov seizes the opportunity to trade off a pair of bishops. Each exchange reduces the number of white pieces, and that can take advantage of their extra space while also relieving some of the pressure on black's cramped position. As a result, the structural weakness of the d4 pawn becomes even more important. Now white captured, bishop takes e7, black captured with the knight. The correct recapture, as black strengthens his hold on the d5 square. If instead queen takes e7, then white can play d5, a good move. Gives white the initiative in the center and no more IQP. So after knight takes e7, now white played bishop to b3. In a world championship match, the white pieces are valuable. So Korchnoi didn't want to quickly reach a completely equal position with d5, which would exchange central pawns. However, the move played in the game is somewhat slow. A more natural move would have been rook e1. Now black played knight f6. The knight returns to the center and further consolidates black's grip on d5. Knight e5. White knight uses the strong e5 square supported by the IQP. It's like a perfect spot for the knight because black is unlikely to make a move like f6, which could weaken the king structure, the king side. Now black played bishop d7. Black develops and without creating any weaknesses on the queen side. Queen e2. It is almost always a healthy sign when a player succeeds in connecting his rooks. It means that he has got all his minor pieces off the back rank and castled. Rook c8 brings his rook into an open file. Knight e4. We already know that exchanges favor the defender in IQP positions, so white should have preferred simple development with rook fd1 and a balanced position. Now black played knight takes e4, captured the central positioned knight. White captured with the queen, and now black played another good move. Guess what? Bishop c6. He gains time to offer another exchange by attacking the queen. White captured, knight takes c6. White can hardly refuse to exchange, as otherwise the bishop will control a fine diagonal. So now black captured, rook takes c6, offering yet another exchange. With this time white is wise to decline. Already the disappearance of his two knights has undermined any initiative he might develop to compensate for the isolated pawn. So now white played rook c3. White could have balanced the game with rook takes c6, eliminating their isolated pawn after knight c6, then d5. Karpov's choice to recapture with b takes c6 teaches a lesson in position play. So instead of capturing with the knight, taking with the pawn is a good idea. While it may seem unusual to split black's own pawns, it's a clever move. The c6 pawn is stronger than the d4 pawn, which is now under black's control on d5. Black has a clear plan to capture the d4 pawn. Place the queen on b6. Position the rook on d8. If white defends the rook and attacks the c6 with rook c1, black can defend c6 with rook d6. Move the knight to f5 to capture the d4 pawn unless white tries bishop a4 to attack the c6 again, in which case queen takes b2 can pick up some queenside pawns. So after rook takes c6, now white played rook c3. Now black played queen d6. White would also have a rather fragile pawn structure after rook takes c3, b takes c3, queen c7, then c4. When the c and d pawns are known as hanging pawns, but at least the pawns would have some dynamism. So Karpov prefers to give white not the slightest hint of counterplay in the center, and instead continues his attack against the isolated pawn by playing queen d6. Now white played a mistake, g3. White ensures a safe retreat for the king, a defensive precaution against potential back rank threats. However, for a more aggressive approach, white might consider h4 as an intriguing offensive move. h4. So here in this scenario, white could continue with bishop c2 when suitable. If black reacts by blocking the checkmate threat on h7 with g6, white could aggressively advance h5, putting pressure on the king side. Alternatively, if the black knight lands on f5 here or g6, white could dislodge it with g4 or h5 respectively. This would likely prompt black to respond with pawn to f5 after bishop c2 to stop the checkmate, weakening the king side, particularly the e6 pawn. So h4 would have been an interesting move, but white played g3 instead. Now black played rook d8. The remaining part of the game showcases Karpov's exceptional positional skills as he consistently weakens white's position with each move. Initially, he forces a white rook to defend the d4 pawn. Rook d1, defending d4. Now rook b6, another good move by black. Black refrains from trading pieces this time because they aim to utilize both rooks to target the d4 pawn. So black gets ready to triple the rooks on and position the queen against the d4 by playing queen d7, rook c d6. If black played queen d7, right now, instead immediately, then bishop a4 would win material because of the rook here. So after rook b6, also additionally black introduces the concept of rook b4, which initiates a lateral attack on d4 by pinning the queen against pinning the pawn against the queen, which initiates attack on the d4 pawn as well. This move also restricts the mobility of the white bishop. If bishop c2 were played, black could proceed with f5 and then rook takes b2, gaining a pawn. So rook b6 is a good move for black. Now white played queen e1. This is an awkward move that shows something has gone wrong with white's strategy. Still, at least rook b4 can be met with rook c4. Now black played queen d7. Simple and strong, black prepares to exert maximum pressure on the d4 pawn. Rook c d3. It is a bad sign when pieces as powerful as rooks have to be used as babysitters to defend a weak pawn. Rook d6. The pressure on the isolated queen's pawn or IQP increases. As Aaron Nimzowitsch suggested, the strategy for an isolated pawn is to first limit its movement, then blockade it, and ultimately eliminate it. Now white played queen e4. The queen moves back to the center, positioning itself for a potential response to knight f5 with d5 to eliminate the troublesome pawn. Black played queen c6. Another good move. Another unwelcome offer to exchange pieces. Queen f4. Now if instead queen takes c6, then knight takes c6, d5, knight b4, the pawn on d5 drops. So white played queen f4 and now black played another good move, knight d5. If knight f5 instead, then d5 and white escapes as if e takes d5, queen takes f5. That is why white put his queen on f4. Finally, black has the d5 pawn blockaded after knight d5, not just restrained. Now there's no longer a risk of a sudden d5 breakthrough. The knight is an excellent choice for blockading because it can directly confront the pawn without any reduction in its effectiveness. In contrast, a rook would be blocked if the pawn is sufficiently defended. Now white played queen d2. Nevertheless, the IQP still has a lot of friends and will prove a tough nut to crack. Queen b6. Now there is the threat of knight b4 chasing away the rook from d3, followed by rook takes d4. White captured, bishop takes d5. An example of making unwise exchanges. White opts to remove the strong knight, resulting in a completely balanced position, with the only difference being white's vulnerable d4 pawn. A more favorable option would have been to retain the bishop and play a3 instead to prevent knight b4. This strategic move could have allowed the bishop to have the final say if black overcommitted in exploiting the isolated queen's pawn. White captured, bishop takes knight, and now black played rook takes bishop, threatening e5. Rook b3. Instead of this pseudo active move, Karpov suggests that white might have played f4 immediately to rule out the e5. Now black played queen c6. Naturally, black has no intention of giving up his healthy b7 pawn for the weakening on d4 with queen takes d4. So if queen takes d4, then takes, takes and rook takes pawn on b7. So black played queen c6, white played queen c3. The white queen steps out of the looming pin on the d file and offers an exchange that would strengthen the d pawn. If queen takes c3, then b takes c3. Queen d7, another good move. Rather than becoming active, the white queen and rook on b3 are now seen to be misplaced for the task of defending the IQP, which is now attacked 3 times. Now white played f4. This is a desperate move because it exposes the white king to vulnerabilities that Karbov will later use to secure victory. Yes, yet it was the sole way to stop e5, which would not only capture the pawn but also generate a passed pawn after e takes d4. Now black played another good move, b6. A quiet move, but it introduces the threat of rook takes d4, as b7 is no longer hanging after the exchanges on d4. Rook b4. The rook is reduced to a torturous sideways defense of d4. It would have been so much better to leave it on d3 when it was there. So b5, another good move. This pawn move disrupts white's intended move of rook c4, which would have placed the rook effectively on an open file. Now there is no good response to avoid a5, which would push the rook back, followed by b4, and this d4 will be gone. So after b5, white played a4. The vulnerability of d4 has already had a negative impact on white's king side, evidenced on the 30th move by f4. Now it extends to the queen side, as white sacrifices a pawn in a desperate attempt to generate some counter play. B takes a4. Now white played queen a3. Idea, rook takes a4, then rook takes a7. Black played another good move, a5. Karpov wisely returns the pawn in order to leave the white queen and rook misplaced on the edge of the board. Rook takes a4. And then black played queen b5, another good move. The queen's position prevents rook takes a5 and confines the white rook uncomfortably on a4, where it lacks any safe moves. The white queen is also constrained as it must protect the rook. Moreover, black is posing a threat to infiltrate white's second rank with queen e2, or perhaps even more effectively with rook c8, then rook c2. This marks the initial consequence of white's earlier move f4, exposing the king. So now white played rook d2. The only hope was to free the white queen from the defense of the rook on a4 with b3. Though Karpov's intention of rook b8, queen takes b3 leads to a winning rook and pawn endgame for black. Now black played an excellent move, e5, an unexpected but entirely logical breakthrough. White's queen and rook on a4 are both quite distant on the queen side, and white's king has limited pawn protection. The question is, where should black focus the attack? Should it be on the queen side or d4, which has 3 defenders? No, the best target against white is where they have the fewest defenders, which is the king side. As is often the case, a pawn advance becomes a key move in creating open lines and delivering the decisive blow. So e5. Now white had to capture with the f pawn and then rook captured e5. Now the threat is checkmate in 2. Rook e1 check, king g2, queen f1, checkmate. And if d takes e5, then rook takes d1, d2 leaves white unable to prevent disaster, following with rook d1 check or queen e2. with a quick mate such as the power of a rook on the 7th rank. Now white played queen a1, controlling the first rank. Black played another good move, queen e8. A beautiful retreat which compels his opponent to take the unwanted rook, because right now black is threatening to play rook e1 check, and it's a double attack. White captured, that's the only move, rook takes d2. Now black gets a rook on the 7th rank. Rook takes a5. Then black played queen c6, threatening queen g2 checkmate. White played rook a8 check, king h7 black, and then queen b1 check. If queen a1, then queen takes a8. So queen b1 check, then black blocked the check with g6, and then white played queen f1, threatening queen takes f7 checkmate and defending the g2 square as well. Now black played queen c5 check, king h1, and then queen d5 check, another good move, and white resigned. The black queen radiates power in all directions on the light squares. She has influence over far-flung corners of the board on a8 and h1, as well as two other crucial squares, f7 for defense and d1 for attack. White is mated after q g2, then rook d1, or else loses his queen for a rook after king g1, then rook d1. There was, however, one last pitfall for black to avoid after king g1. Black must not snatch the rook with queen takes a8. That would be a blunder. Because of queen takes f7 check, king h8, q f6 check, black finds to his horror that he must accept a perpetual check with king h7, queen f7 check, king h8, queen f6 check. Why? Because if black goes to king g8, another blunder, then queen takes g6, check, king f8 or king h8, then queen takes h6, check. Korchnoi expected Karpov to capture queen with rook d1, leading to his immediate resignation. However, for less experienced players, I suggest making one more move with king g1 in case their opponents fall into the trap that I mentioned earlier. Karpov's performance in this game was a beautiful demonstration of positional chess. So some key principles learned from the game. IQP strategy. Understanding and managing in isolated queen's pawn or IQP is a key aspect. Positional mastery. Karpov excels in positioning his pieces, targeting opponents' weaknesses and avoiding complications. Piece activity. He prioritizes active piece placement and coordination. Pawn structure impact. The significance of pawn structures and their influence on the game. Open lines. Creating open lines to pressure the opponent. Strategic planning. Moves are designed to create lasting weaknesses while minimizing counterplay. Avoiding unnecessary exchanges. Karpov conserves pieces to maintain initiative and pressure. Tactics and traps. Tactical elements serve strategic objectives. Patience. Waiting for the right moments to act. Endgame prowess. Karpov's excellent endgame technique secures victory. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned something from this game as well. Please like, comment, share and subscribe to my channel to show some support. Thank you. See you in the next video. Bye.